back to the Nutrimedical Report with Ann Morrison. Her blog is TWILAND, TWILAND.info, and we have lots of information to cover, so let's start at the top with your latest science blog. And, of course, we do a recap after the show with lots of pictures to explain a lot of the issues that are going on. We handle biosecurity, free speech, climate today, and seismic issues, so let's get started.
Right, I want to start with Zika. There's not a whole lot new, but the thing that is new, but the things that are new are important. There was a Utah case, and I think we discussed it last week,
right,
of an elderly man who had traveled into a Zika endemic area, and he had come back with Zika, and because he was elderly, he had a home health aide who happened to be one of his relatives, and the older man died, but the caretaker, who was in the family, but the caretaker, he came down with Zika, and there are no mosquitoes that spread Zika in Utah. And
so bodily fluids, whether it's stool, urine, or blood, were probably a factor.
Well, that's what I would think, too.
Well, because the sinuses directly communicate with parts of the brain, especially if you're degenerating. Most people don't realize a lot of people have dementia, have chronic sinusitis, for example, and there's often direct communication with the brain and the fluids around the brain and the sinus cavity.
Yes. So what's happened is the caretaker survived. I'm not going to say he's cured because we know that Zika hides in the body.
Right.
But he survived, and at least so far. And they're looking at how it could have happened. It could have been, we know we had talked earlier about a needle stick in the Department of Health, and so we know that they're spreading Zika around into the county departments of health. And a needle stick, one of the technicians there got Zika, or possibly contact with urine or saliva. But
so in other words, kissing or sharing food might do it too.
Yes, but they don't think that it was transmitted by sex because they say it wasn't.
Right, yeah.
Your own family member. I mean,
it's unlikely, yeah. So when you look at the circumstances, this raises transmission routes that are kind of bizarre and scary.
Well, the scary part is that the CDC has put a team on the ground in Utah, and what they say is those experts will help determine whether the virus was transmitted by mosquito. And the implication there is that they're only looking at a mosquito transmission. I mean, they understand sexual transmission.
Why would they do that? And it's almost like you say, we're going to prove a specific thing, and if we don't prove the null hypothesis on this, then we don't know what caused it. And there's probably 4 or 5 different possible routes of transmission, including bodily fluids and even droplet spray, if there's enough fecal virus present in his nasal mucous membranes or in the mouth. I mean, this is kind of strange, isn't it? That they would do.
This is really strange. It causes cognitive dissonance on anybody who has a brain. And I suspect that they are going to find the mosquito even if they have to plant it.
Well, the problem is eventually there's enough endemic people sick, whether it's pets or humans, there are enough mosquitoes are going to bite these people and eventually be a carrier also. But it's probably secondary to the fact that human beings may be the primary repository and or pets. And a lot of people don't realize, for example, we looked at H1N1 flu in Germany. It was discovered in Germany where it was popping up H1N1 flu 10 years ago, that it was the pets, the cats, and the feral cats and other animals in the area that were actually carrying the virus, and it was secondarily affecting humans. But, humans might be the primary repository of this virus. We don't know.
Well, we know it doesn't stay in the blood for very long, maybe 4 to 8 days.
Right.
So, we don't think that mosquito probably, and he was probably inside of that whole time anyway, so we don't think that it was a mosquito transmission.
Yeah, usually you're sick for 4 or 5 days, you get inside the house. You're not outside to getting bitten.
Right, exactly. And so they're kind of stuck. It's possible the mosquito was carried home in its luggage. These Aedes aegypti Mosquitoes are very family friendly. They'll follow you indoors.
They're like little pets, in other words.
They are pets.
Pets. Yeah.
Pets. And, it's possible. But he didn't report a mosquito bite. And normally you can tell when you've been bitten. I mean, normally you get a sore on your arm or leg or wherever.
Right.
And so I don't think they're going to find a mosquito, but they are very, very reluctant to think of saliva as a transmission route. But we know that it is. I mean, when they do tests of saliva, they find Zika in the saliva.
It might even persist in saliva longer than it does in the blood. We don't know. We say the main thing is.
Yeah, we do know.
And the thing is, we know it does in the endocervical canal in women, like this Guadalupe Island in the Caribbean that was discovered recently. Now you have a second issue that you want to talk about: Zika virus, microcephaly, and Guillain-Barré. The range of neurological and eye disorders that are probably caused by chronic low-grade stealth infections with RNA Zika virus hides inside the cell affecting the endoplasmic reticulum is probably wider than we think, isn't it?
Yes, the World Health Organization, actually known as WHO, has put out a report on the current status of Zika, and in my blog there will be a nice chart that shows the growth of the number of cases through the beginning of 2015 to 2016. And, of course, starting in January of 2016, it really hit Brazil, and you see a big uptick there. And then the top little layer on these bar charts is Africa. And it has been confirmed that it is in Guinea-Bissau, and which is just north of Guinea, which surrounds Sierra Leone, which is north of Liberia. So all those three countries have already been hit with Ebola, and they don't know how many people have residual effects from Ebola, and they don't know how long it stays in the body. Again, it seems to be in the reproductive tracts.
Well, one thing I want to do is I like to throw monkey wrenches. It's really good, and it's almost like a fun game. The next thing is, are there co-infections? One of the things that freaked me out years ago when I started sending off bloods to, had people come in and said, well, I think, because I call them Google geniuses, they were smart people that went on the internet and thought they had Lyme disease or Lyme-like parasites, or cytomegalovirus or Incline Village, Nevada virus. And when I'd send off their tests to the immunology lab at Biosciences, originally in Beverly Hills, but they moved to L.A. with Dr. Aristo Vujadani, they come back with 5 viruses. They'd also have other pathogens, and they have signatures of not only acute infection, but what the markers of a chronic previous infection still present in their system. So you wonder, you got to be kidding. Maybe these people have more than one bug going on. Maybe they have West Nile virus or the sequelae after it. Maybe they've got yellow fever virus in the past. Maybe they've got multiple organisms, sort of a combination or a brew of them, some of them being acute and some of them showing signatures of a previous infection. So one of the things we should start doing is asking questions that take us out of our comfort zone to say, is this just one infection or is it a combination?
That's a good question that should be asked by every doctor.
If they don't test, you don't know. When I started doing testing, I always, after I get the few tests back, because Aristo is a very good scientist, he trained in Bar-Ilan University in Israel and UCLA, and we did research back 36 years ago on toxic adjuvants with Dr. Chung at UCLA on how it activated autoimmune disease and cancer. And believe me, the environmental organizations, including the Alberta Workers' Comp Board, were totally freaked out and very ticked off at Deagle because the research was at a premier institution proving the toxic pesticides and adjuvant chemicals, including in vaccines and biotoxins that get in the biosphere, amplify allergenicity up to millions of times, increase the levels of cancerous gene changes that can induce cancer, and can cause autoimmune disease by changing tissue proteins. And we saw the evidence of all of this. And we when people said, well, you can't prove that, I said, you're talking to Deagle. I can prove all these things with my top doctor labs. And it's not conjecture either. It's something that we can do right now, and we have been for decades. So it concerns me that they're not asking the questions of, there's only 15 base pair changes in the Zika virus when they actually compare its genetics before and after the OX513A gene. So is it just Zika only, or is it Zika plus pesticides or Zika plus other infections that are causing some of these individuals to get a different course of their illness? I don't know. I'd like to raise a question, because the only way to get wiser is to ask good enough questions that you'll start looking in places you ordinarily won't look.
Well, they are already starting to consider that Zika may not be an acute disease, that it may be chronic, and that it may hide in the body. And not only that, the family contains the virus that causes hepatitis C. And you'll get microcephaly with hep C in 10% of the pregnant women who have it.
Isn't that interesting?
That's very interesting. So they're going to have to look at the whole family, and that means more than just the flaviviruses, the 5 that we've been talking about.
Right, so maybe they need to do a wider net in terms of immunological testing and markers of immune system function like the UPR, unfolding protein response. If you can get microcephaly for hepatitis C, that's pretty significant. If a woman is pregnant and has hepatitis C and 10% of the time can get microcephaly, it means maybe this is a polyinfective process that's going on and it's chronic.
Oh, well, yes, of course.
Yeah.
So we have 2 things that we should be looking at. One is how many viruses does this person have, and 2, is this a chronic virus or
I'll give you an example. Do you know when they first discovered that there was mycobacteria in diabetics? How long ago do you think they discovered this? And these are doctors, or Arab doctors, during the flower of Islamic scientific endeavor in the Middle Ages, when they weren't into jihad and beheading people, but they were more into scientific and musical and artistic discovery. It's over 1,000 years ago. So a lot of diseases that we don't think, for example, do you know that the protein amino acid sequence of the Cerevisia fungus that we use actually for making bread is identical to the amino acid sequence on the splanchnic member of the bowel wall in ulcerative colitis. It's identical. So there's immune homology there occurring between the fungus. So what I'm trying to say is stealth homologous infections trigger off not only genetic and epigenetic changes, but trigger off autoimmune disease. And one of the things that because our scientists don't ask the right questions, they don't look in the right places, and they never find the answer.
Well, yeah. As of the 13th of July, about a week ago, the CDC has reported 7 live-born infants with birth defects and 5 pregnancy losses with birth defects with laboratory evidence of Zika virus infections.
Now, I think you quoted out that was it this report you sent last week, that there were, 300 women currently that are Zika positive in terms of their blood tests, and they're pregnant. Is that right?
Yeah, and then you have to multiply that by 5, 1,500.
Right. So the 1,500 women in America have Zika virus, probably during the first trimester, which is when the UPR effect can cause microcephaly, and all that's left is the reptilian brain.
Well, and the other thing they found out is that when they're monitoring the brain of the fetus, a normal-sized brain sometimes will be born with, it's just full of fluid. It's not, they can't use the size of the head as an indication.
Yeah, they have a form of basically what appears to be normal cephalic head, but it's actually hydrocephalic.
Yes, exactly. It's full of water.
Right.
And so you can't just go by that. And all you pregnant women out there, if that's what your gynecologist is doing, is just measuring the head and says, oh no, the head size is normal. Well, it may be normal, but you probably need to have your cervical mucus checked.
Yeah.
For Zika.
Right.
Because they have.
By the way, the Zika virus is now in most of the southern United States. It's actually spreading like crazy.
Well, they aren't. I listened in on a talk yesterday. The person from the CDC and the person from the Arizona University was talking. He works with the CDC. And my impression was that they don't want to give the label STD to Zika because it's because people don't like it.
How about we call it, I got a new term for it, call it STZ. How's that?
Yeah. No, it's
in other words, sexually transmitted Zika. So, why don't they want to do that? I think that's a form of public health, misadventure on their part, lying to people and say you can't get it, just like, you can't get herpes from kissing, whatever. It's like, are you kidding?
They're lying. Yeah, they're absolutely lying. They know that it's an STD, but they will not call it an STD because there's a stigma. The doctors will have to counsel the patients, and the contacts will have to be revealed.
Yeah, and then, what makes it different than, say, chlamydia genitalis, or gonorrhea, which, by the way, now is getting multi-drug resistant? So they think in the very near future, will be multi-drug resistant gonorrhea will be the standard, which means it'll never respond to conventional antibiotics. Our antipathogenics will kill it or put it in remission, which we do for herpes virus or papillomavirus that causes abnormal pap smears. We can do that right now. But people don't understand. I mean, you need to stay on an antipathogenic forever to keep the virus, which may be intracellular, or the pathogen like a mycobacteria or fungus or spirochete, from reactivating genetic and cellular antigen changes that can cause autoimmune disease or cancer. People don't know this. And of course, their doctors are not trained to look at the idea of micropathology, immunological changes, and epigenetics, because epigenetics is really important. And what this is, in a sense, most of the damage caused by Zika and probably other viruses is epigenetic.
Well, you understand that people who are past childbearing age think that they don't have to worry about catching Zika. Nothing could be further from the truth.
Right.
Because it can be transmitted through saliva or vaginal secretions or seminal fluid. And let's say a grandmother has Zika, and she's around her granddaughter, and she gives her a kiss, and she can transfer it to her granddaughter just through that kiss.
Yeah, I would say if we wax back to the Bible, we're dealing with a firestorm of all kinds of plagues, if you want to call it a time of plagues on Earth. And it's not just these two or three we talk about. There's all kinds of new emerging organisms, including Candida auris, which if you go to a type culture laboratory like the one in Osaka, Japan, or in California, some of these fungi produce aldehydes that will literally chew up your brain and have a 100% fatality rate. I mean, most people think, I just got yeast, this is no big deal. Wrong. Some of these subtypes are so damn deadly, they have a 100% mortality rate.
They're very surprised that Candida auris has spread so far, so fast. It wasn't even known a year ago.
So far, the case fatality rate is 60%, and if it's a chronic infection, it may have a higher rate, but their initial case fatality is 60%. That's like catastrophic. And when we're dealing with a major super plague, you're talking about 2.5% is deadly, like the 1918 flu plague. If it's 60%, you're talking about like like a brush fire pandemic. This is very scary stuff.
Well, and most women do have a yeast infection that's treated with over-the-counter drugs, antifungals. But this is a different. This is not that regular Candida fungus. No. It's a different one altogether. And you would almost think it came out of a biolab, and it's being spread.
One of the things that I did is I did type culturing of the various Candidas at the University of San Francisco back in the early 1980s. And I was doing some immunology research on my own without conventional regular labs, but university labs. And what we discovered is that the previous Candida albicans, which is what most people think we have, started being invaded in North America by Candida tropicalis and glabrata. That many of them have different antigenic properties and different aldehyde and other biomolecules that can affect your immune system. And that's dramatically increased. Now, this Candida auris is the latest arrival. But most people don't realize all diabetics are loaded to the gunnels with mycobacteria. And these pathogenic forms of Candida, if you talk to a mycologist at one of these reference labs, and there's 5 in the world, they get freaked out when they see certain biomolecule chemicals showing up on their plating and their metabolic analysis. They say, this is a bad one. Back in a minute. Welcome back. And so, and let's continue on this analysis now. So we want to raise questions to tell people, number one, I recommend that everybody take NutriDefense every day. Everybody take at least one or more of our antipathogenics. If you have sinus problems do irrigate your sinuses with the Sinupulse Elite and Sinuair powder and Nutridyne, and use our pure water system or distilled water. You want to have demineralized and pathogen-free water that you put into the machine. You do not want to use tap water. A lot of people don't realize that the number of stealth pathogens that drives disease is pretty astronomical. You can't develop plaque, like and get 17, stents in your heart, like we had a consult yesterday, unless you have nanobacteria. Nanobacteria always originate in the periodontal tissues and your periodontal fissures or sulci around your teeth. That's where they come from, and they go into your bloodstream, and wherever you have plaque in the circle of Willis in your brain or your carotid arteries at the bifurcation or around your coronary arteries or the renal arteries or down your iliac vessels and you're going to your legs or pudendal arteries, the plaque is always caused by three things: the presence of nanobacteria, the presence of iron or heavy metals, and the presence of oxidized fatty acids and cholesterol. That's it. And if you lose superoxide dismutase 1 and 2 antioxidants and glutathione peroxidase, and you have RAGE or advanced glycosylation end products because you're eating too much sugar and you're demineralizing, losing magnesium and other trace minerals to keep your SOD1 levels up, superoxide dismutase, which is dependent on copper, zinc, you're going to get fried. Now, a lot of people don't realize taking antipathogenics like Nutridyne every day and allicin med and silver is going to change the course of your health. For example, we give people with COPD and asthma silver 100 inhalation, and their asthma goes away because it's rhinovirus subclass 3 growing in their bronchi and respiratory bronchioles. A lot of people aren't aware that many of the illnesses, for example, even illnesses such as chronic papillomavirus infection that cause abnormal pap smear, we can put someone in remission. They can go back and get a acetic acid test and a colposcopy and a biopsy, and their pap smear test will revert back to normal. And then, well, how is that possible? Well, it's possible if you're taking allicin med and silver 100 douches, and the virus disappears, even the intracellular virus, so the genetic changes reverse to normal. Especially if you're taking, we call apoptogenic agents like ellagic acid, which is 300 times higher concentration than pomegranate. Malignant block developed at Johns Hopkins, that's an apoptogenic and gene healing agent, and minoquinone 7 or full vitamin K2, and high-dose power C. So people should start to realize, like and curcumin, which literally converts cancer mother cells and gets rid of them. Curcumin, our new curcumin, which is a Cell Defense Plus, will actually get rid of cancer mother cells and genetic changes which predispose to breast, uterine, prostate, lung, brain, whatever cancer. And these epigenetic effects, and people don't realize most of the illnesses we have, including diabetes and peripheral neuropathy or heart disease, are the epigenetic effects of toxins and stealth pathogens, and which induce mineral and nutrient deficiencies and cause inflammatory and free radical changes and actually turn on and off genes. So it's a heck of a lot more complicated than your so-called regular family doctor or even specialist realizes. Because I ask questions and do research at advanced labs and have been for almost 4 decades now, I know things when I consult with doctors and say, this is where you can do these tests to prove it. For example, I had someone yesterday that called in and they were trying to bifurcate type 1, which is juvenile onset diabetes caused by anti-islet cell antibodies and lymphocytes, with type 2. All type 1 diabetics eventually develop some type 2 resistance. And if you don't reduce their advanced glycosylation end products, they'll get the same endpoints: renal failure, peripheral neuropathy, and loss of vision. So, when I'm providing this information, like with Ann here, you have to understand your public health department are dropping the ball. I mean, even on things that are really basic public health measures to protect the public from expanding plagues, radiotoxins. And by the way, I researched the Veterans Affairs, and these people are out of their mind. The radiation numbers they're quoting, and they won't give me the reference information or their facilities that are actually doing the testing. These people are lying. Do not believe any of the garbage they say about how the radiation levels are off into orbit. There's still some radiation coming, but most of it is at 26 to 30,000 feet, and unless it rains down, and we should have USB radiation detectors in aircraft with their flight paths so we can determine if rain does happen. We have on-the-ground radiation detectors to determine if the rain brought down dangerous radiation. And you should have clothes, like Ann said a few years ago, so you can take your rain clothes and leave them outside because your detector indicated the rain brought back some nasty radiation from 26 to 30,000 feet. When I raise these issues to the so-called nuclear departments of our government, they just get all freaked out and say, well, why are you asking these questions? Not good. Not good at all. Back in a moment. So, Ann, the next issue I want to talk about is free speech, and I guess you talked about this on John's show. John Moore, who's also here on Republic Broadcasting, he has an excellent show earlier in the morning. And so if you go to republicbroadcasting.org, you can find John's show. It's also posted up on their own Republic Broadcasting Blueberry Network and so on RSS feeds. It's great, a great show, excellent information. It's about the Secret Service investigating a Trump advisor, Al Baldassaro, who said Hillary Clinton should be, quote, shot for treason now. I know a lot of people make offhand comments, but, you know, people should understand everybody and everything, every email, phone, fax, and so on ends up as metadata somewhere in some secret compartment of the NSA, CIA, or some foreign agency like the Brazilian secret police or whatever. And you know, they can target individuals by just going into the metadata and pulling up stuff where you mention a tweet on Twitter, or a comment on Facebook, or an article, or just an offside comment when you're at a stadium and somebody recorded it. And it ended up on YouTube. So what happened here? What's the story about Al Baldassaro? Because that name rings a bell. It doesn't sound like a minor person under Trump. It sounds like a fairly major person, this Al Baldassaro.
Yeah, he's the state representative for New Hampshire, and he was talking on a talk radio, talking to a talk radio host.
Right.
And he said that Clinton should pay for the 2012 Benghazi attack, and something's wrong here. And then he made that statement. Yeah, well,
maybe if he added the comment, in a previous time in American history, if you had committed an act of treason, which is what this is, if you were found guilty in a court of law, you would be shot. Now, because he didn't do that, and didn't qualify that, that's where they're going to come after him. So you can't call for the death of a political figure just because they're a devil or they're planning on major destruction of America or they've killed people because of their bad policies like Hillary. But if he had qualified that, he probably would have got away. But obviously they want to see if they can target in any way, shape, or form anybody even distantly affiliated with Trump, just like they went after his other advisor, who supposedly pulled on the arm of a lady, and she said she was assaulted and thrown to the ground, which is a lie, because you got video camera proof of that. Remember, that's Corey Lewandowski. So what do you think came out of this? Where's this going?
Well, John said that, the Secret Service, anytime that you threaten a political public figure, then they're going to investigate. And he said you just have to be careful what you say. You can say that I think she should be tried for treason, or like you said, use the other, in another time she would have been. But do not say.
Don't say stupid things. One of the problems with the wall of anonymity, sometimes being on radio or Twitter or Facebook, people get they have a lack of reason and restraint, and their tongue runs ahead of their brain and their common sense making statements. And if you have someone listening that's a little bit unstable and doesn't have a proper reality view, and they have skill sets that might kill them, maybe they're an ex-vet, and they're losing it, and they're on serotonin reuptake inhibitors that disinhibit them, they may go do something. So you can't make stupid comments unless you expect to see results.
That's
which
right.
Could be very nasty,
And remember that this is the political season, and so you just have to watch your tongue. Don't say anything that can get you into trouble. Now, apparently at that time, they were talking, other people were talking about shooting Trump, but they didn't get pulled in. Oh, no,
they're never going to mention that.
Because he wasn't a political figure yet.
But even now that he's a political figure, I think the media and the Secret Service would try to look the other way at anything, even the significant things. Like, remember, he was the reigning candidate, and that guy grabbed him by the leg. He didn't even spend 2 hours in jail. He was out within hours, and literally was on, I think, CNN as a celebrity for having grabbed him, and he apparently had a knife in his hand because he cut one of the hands of the Secret Service who had gloves on, and he bled. And I saw the photos of his hand bleeding, so I realized we have a man who had a knife in his hand, tried to grab the presidential candidate for the Republican Party who was leading at the time, ahead of Cruz, and stabbed a Secret Service agent and was literally released within hours, and there were no consequences, even though he was literally yelling that he was trying to kill Trump. Okay, so we have to understand there's selective application of the law, the same way as the IRS is going after conservatives, and it's very evident we have an out-of-control federal government, which is why they're so freaked out by Trump, because he's got a hell of a big job ahead of him. As I said to Roger Stone on the program when I talked to him last week, and because he'll be coming on probably next week after the convention to kind of give an analysis, and Roger said, anything is possible. I'm really glad nothing bad happened to anybody inside the stadium or to Trump, but don't be surprised that they tried to do an assassination attempt on Trump. Don't be surprised at the fact that he wears level 3 body armor all the time in his own private security force besides Secret Service. Don't be surprised that the zombies ordered by George Soros and the globalists wouldn't try to do anything, literally anything, to make sure they dismount Trump so he can't continue to do what he's going to do, which is pretty horrendous to the globalists and their plans.
That's right. Okay, can we talk about the Arctic, Alaska?
Yeah, let's do that. We got the climate issues, ozone hole over the North Magnetic Pole, the jet stream crossing the equator in the Arctic, Alaska records, highest temperature ever recorded.
Yes, and it was recorded on July 13th, which was a week ago, in Dead Horse, far north Alaska, and I've applauded on it. And it's like what they call the North Slope. It's really far north Alaska.
This is far north. I've practiced in British Columbia, and these areas of Alaska are 1,000 miles further north. I mean, we're talking about really far north.
Okay, well, the scary part, there's two scary parts. One is that it reached 85 degrees Fahrenheit.
That's really scary. That's scary.
That's scary enough. But then, when you read the National Weather Service report, they say that, let's see, I want to get it right. A sharp temperature drop is expected by the weekend, and during the next week, that's this week, temperatures could drop by as much as 20 degrees Fahrenheit below normal. So you've got this huge swing in temperatures at the North Pole, and that is scary. Because remember when the mastodons were frozen when they were eaten?
Yeah, do you know how that happened? One of my colleagues who actually went to high school with went to the Bedford Institute and NOAA, the National Oceanographic Institute, to Baffin Island. And you know how big the tusks were from the woolly mammoths they exhumed? They were 26 feet long. And these woolly mammoths are 6 times the mass of an African elephant, and they were flash frozen with food in their mouth from over 10,000 years ago, and it's like you dropped them literally head first into a large vat of liquid nitrogen, because it was what's called a polar inversion, and when the air came down, it was coming down at over 200 miles an hour. When it hit these woolly mammoths, they literally were in the middle of chewing, and they got frozen solid as a rock in a matter of seconds. I mean, that's amazing. That literally the food in their mouths was still fresh after 10,000 years. And in fact, they were actually cutting up woolly mammoth steaks and serving it in a restaurant in Paris up to a few years ago, believe it or not.
Yeah.
So these events can happen. They're called polar tropospheric inversions. And it's like the day after tomorrow in that movie that came out. Those things are real, and they can really happen literally in a matter of minutes.
Yes, and we need to realize that it has happened, that this is not fantasy. It's not fantasy fiction.
No.
This is something that people actually know about because they dug up the mammoth, and they ate it. That's how fast it was frozen.
But most people don't realize that often before a major ice age, there's a period of heating. And one of the things that can happen is massive shifts in temperature. The thing that I'm most scared about, because I don't think CO2 from humans is causing the major global warming. I think it's all these climatic things and jet stream. But what can happen that can cause massive, very rapid global warming is the release of methane hydrates. And they persist in the upper atmosphere 6 months before they break down to CO2 and then they dissipate. But people don't realize the amount of methane hydrates released from the permafrost in these areas, even along the oceanic coast here in California, like Pendleton Marine Corps Base. They're everywhere. And the ozone is, and when they go up there, these methane hydrates, they have two bad effects. One is they cause global warming. The other, they accelerate the rate of deterioration of the ozone layer.
Okay, and I want to talk about that right now. I have a map that shows the ozone hole right over the North
magnetic pole. Now, the North Magnetic Pole, as you remember, has migrated. It's traveling at 40 miles a year from, it used to be on the border between Alaska and Canada, and it's traveling around across the top of the world, and it's now just off the coast of Siberia. And you can look at the pictures. NASA takes these pictures and publishes them. They're in the public domain. And you can see by the color that there is an ozone hole that is growing bigger, and it's over the magnetic North Pole. Now, why is it over the magnetic North Pole? I don't know. But
let me give you a theory that I've been working on for years.
Good.
The theory is there's 5 layers to the Van Allen radiation belt. There's 3 layers out at 22,000 miles where the Black Knight satellite's in polar orbit. It's 6 times larger than the U.S. International Space Station with Russia, etc. This the 4th layer of the Van Allen radiation belt is tropospheric. It's 73 to 80,000 feet, where they put on particles that are paramagnetic: strontium, thorium, barium, and aluminum. And these act as a paramagnetic amplifier of scalar radiation, so they can open up what's called harmonic radiation, induction of tectonic plates, and the movement of ringwoodite to activate the release of water that can cause volcanism and earthquakes. So this is Space Command. This is classified information I know, and I'm releasing it. Now, what they've done by weaponizing the planet, they also changed the interaction between our planet and the solar system and galaxy, because we're getting gravity waves coming in from, people call it Nibiru, but it's not. It's called Herculobus, or the Destroyer, or Nemesis. It's a dwarf star that's now already been picked up by the ALMA, the advanced, what's called the Atacama Large Millimeter Array. It's out at 0.73 light years. It's in the outer solar system beyond the Oort cloud, and it has large planet-sized objects like the size of Neptune and Uranus and Jupiter around it. And it has huge gravity waves, and as it comes in, these gravity waves affect the solar output of energy from the sun, and they affect the Earth and all the inner planets because they're all nuclear reactors. Now, what happens is that the bottom layer of the Van Allen radiation belt is called the keeper, or if you have a magnet, it's called a keeper, and it's called the lithospheric layer. And the lithospheric layer, if you hit the right harmonic frequency, the tectonic plates separate. The mu, or resistance between the plates, drops to 0, and they release energy until the mu goes back up again. So you can trigger off an earthquake if you have the right telluric frequencies across a specific fault zone. Okay? And they can do this from space. They have the space-based weapons to trigger off earthquakes or volcanism or subduction zone fault zones in the ocean. Anywhere on the planet, we have those technology right now, the U.S. That's scary stuff that they've weaponized the planet. Now, what it also means is it also amplifies the solar and galactic events that are going on. And the reason why it's over the magnetic pole is because the way the Earth is designed, it has a solid core, and around it's a liquid, if you want to call it, outer core, and the movement of the nuclear isotopes that are basically highly charged radioisotopes with a lot of electrons creates what's called a torsion field. Now, the torsion field is what creates our magnetosphere. The movement of the solid core and the charged radioisotopes around it. And they've done experiments where we've actually created simulations of these underground, like in North Bay, Ontario, and elsewhere, where they've actually created what's called a torsion field generator to generate a magnetosphere. So the magnetosphere is created by the reactor, the outer liquid mantle that's a radioisotope core of thorium, strontium, aluminum, uranium, etc., rotating around a solid core, creating a torsion field that creates a magnetic sphere, where it emerges through the poles and then comes back and then goes back into the other pole. So it emerges from the North Pole and enters back to the South Pole. Now, what's happened is we have 2 South Poles in the South Atlantic Ocean, and the North Pole. The reason why this is circulating is because the lithospheric layer of the Van Allen radiation belt is getting ready for what's called a lithospheric disjunction, which means every so many thousands or hundreds of thousands of years, the crust of the Earth moves on the mantle. And they discovered this first, believe it or not, and they didn't know what the heck it was for about a decade. Space Command did, when they discovered a bunch of dormant magma domes going back millions or even a couple billion years. And they said, well, what are these? They looked through the Earth through their torsion field imaging satellites in the early 60s, and they could say, gee, there's these giant pock marks on Earth going down anywhere from 2 to 6 or 7, 8 miles. they were dormant magma domes where the feeder hotspot had moved. And so they're no longer getting fed with magma. And they're the ideal place for building these underground cities. The next thing is to create what's called a matrix. And so what they realize is that, for example, it's been estimated that Alaska was on the equator 8 million years ago. Is that interesting or what? Mm-hmm. Alaska was on the equator 8 million years ago. So the rearrangement of the continents is completely different. For example, the map of Antarctica was written by Amarillo Vespasi, the Portuguese map maker, that apparently, according to the records in the Vatican, he actually got ancient documents that go back to Alexandria that go back 10,000 years plus, before the last ice age was over. Mm-hmm. And that means that Antarctica was a populated continent at some distant time in the past. Believe it or not. You can actually see frozen plant life, frozen in the permafrost under the ocean. And there's a giant ocean basically in Antarctica, underwater, freshwater ocean, believe it or not. And you can see plant life there. You go down there with these submarines or whatever, submersibles, because I took care of the teams that were from McMurdo Bay, and they found sea life down there and plants and trees and so on that have been literally frozen because the actual positions of the continents have moved that much over many thousands of years that Antarctica used to have regular plants and so on it. Is that interesting? Well, it's
the same thing with Greenland. Greenland used to be green.
Right. Yeah. Now there are cycles with we call the cycles that are of ice age cycles, like the Maunder cycle, where Jupiter and Saturn line up, and 2 times that, which is every 360 years, is a cooling period. So there was 4-foot ice in the Thames River, and they put ice houses on there and have parties 360 years ago in London. And we're now in a Maunder cycle right now, basically a cooling cycle, 3 to 5 degree temperature difference, where we're cooling off. And that's happening as we speak right now, according to a bunch of scientists that met in Chicago 4 years ago, June. So what's happening is, so I wanted to mention this, so the reason why this is moving so darn fast is something's going to happen. I don't know when it's going to happen, but something's going to happen. And they first discovered a thing called the zebra effect, where they pull these magnetometers across the ocean floor looking for U-boats back after the Second World War, and they discovered what's called the alignment of the magnetic flux lines over the interoceanic cleft, which occurs as 23,000 miles long, was reversing every so many thousands of years. It's like, this is weird. It's because it's an unstable planet. Things move. Continents move. Islands move. And often the movement is relatively fast. The speed of an ambling senior citizen with a cane, but over 2 or 3 months. Maybe 1,200 miles, that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
interesting. Yeah, big stuff, eh?
Well, we know man isn't doing it.
And we're back with Ann, and we're talking about seismic activity. Of course, we know the jet stream has crossed the equator again. This is very weird and not normal. It means we're going to see extreme weather like the day after tomorrow superstorms, and the seismic activity and what's going on, and then we'll kind of discern perhaps some of the possible causative reasons why it's increasing.
Yes, this is out of the Smithsonian Institution, and they do a report every week. And this is this week's report, and when you look at it, it's really striking that there are 5 volcanoes active in Central America, and there are at least 3, maybe 4 volcanoes active along the Kamchatka Peninsula in Russia,
right,
and at least one in Alaska. Now, all of those are on the North American tectonic plate. That's what I want people to know is we have...
Oh, so you've made a major conclusion. Now, that means if it's on the North American plate, that means there's water being released from nascent oxygen and hydrogen from the ringwoodite at 400 to 700 kilometers down in the inner mantle. And that is the thing that drives all volcanism and all earthquake, is driven, believe it or not, by steam created by nascent oxygen and hydrogen creating nascent water. And
everything on the North American tectonic plate.
Wow.
Be prepared.
That's important. Now, what that means, and this is something that the volcanologists and the earthquake experts have concluded, that the energy tends to move clockwise around the Ring of Fire. So it moves from Japan and subduction zones, because that's the North American plate over there, believe it or not, by Japan. and then it moves toward Alaska, and then down toward the Cascadia subduction zone, and then toward the San Andreas Fault and the San Jacinto Fault zone that runs all the way from Southern California, where I live, 75 miles from here, all the way down through the Baja California, past Mexico City out in the ocean. So it means the big one's coming.
It means the big one's coming, and I have more information about that. But if you look at the earthquake, we did have a 4.7 at Bayside, California.
Right.
But it was only 14 miles deep, which means it was spread. But you've noticed that I colored in the hazard areas in the United States. You can tell where New Madrid is and all that.
Right.
Okay, so that was that one. There was a 4.7 off of Bayside, California. Then there was a 6.0 that was out in Oceania, close to New Zealand. Okay, Now they did this report. It's called the Rogers Creek Fault, and it goes through Santa Rosa. Now Santa Rosa is north of San Francisco.
Right.
They've been wondering why the San Andreas Fault hasn't slipped yet, because we've been talking about the strain on the San Andreas Fault.
Yeah.
And what they found is that in Santa Rosa there's another fault, and it's called the Rogers Creek Fault, and it's stuck. And it's stuck because there's a dense magnetic body of rock in Santa Rosa, under Santa Rosa.
Oh, really?
So they think that is going to be the most likely fault to produce the next large earthquake in the Bay Area.
So in other words, if they're watching that one, that's the trigger.
Yep.
So in about an hour and a half, we'll do a video update, Ed, with all these fancy pictures, and expand on it. Thank you for an amazing TWILAND.INFO update. We'll be back in a moment with the firing line, your questions on health and wellness issues, plus anything, spiritual, geopolitical, whatever. If you have a question, ask the maestro, Michelle, and she'll be back in just a moment to get started with hour number 3. Thank you, Ann. We'll be back in about an hour and a half on live stream. If you haven't signed up now. We'll be back in a moment.